In the early days of gaming, things were simple and quite fun, and after playing these titles, well, I knew I'd be a gamer for the rest of my life. I am the Game Collector, and this is Second Opinion Games, and today I'm gonna look at Atari 2600 games that I love.
Second Opinion Games.
I thought I'd start things off with a little bit of Joust. This is definitely best played 2 players. If you're playing just 1 player, well, things get kind of boring here. Basically, you're a guy that rides on top of an ostrich that flaps its wings real hard with the action button, and you want to be slightly above your enemy. If you are, they will blast into a little egg that will float around and never seem to land, unlike the arcade version, and then will eventually form into a new enemy. So make sure you pick up that egg so that guy will never form. If you're playing 2 player, well, there could be tons of different enemies on screen as well as fighting against the second player. Unfortunately, I don't have any friends, even though this is clearly one of the best multiplayer games on the 2600. And there's also a freaking fire dragon that you have to worry about, and boy, does this game ever get tough. And it's also one of probably the best to look at. But this isn't the only thing flying in the sky. Let's take a look at Phoenix. Yeah, your main character just moves along the ground and fires up, but what you're trying to shoot at is these birds, who eventually turn into much bigger birds with wings that you could even shoot off. And occasionally they can regrow their wings, so make sure you get a dead center shot to make him explode in the dust. And then you'll be fighting even harder birds that are a bit more aggressive. If you manage to clear this level, well, then you'll fight an alien in a stinking spaceship. Luckily, you have a shield at your disposal too. I found it best to move to the side, break down the different walls, and then move to the middle, hit the shield, take all of the bullets like a giant bullet sponge, and land that crushing, finishing shot, destroying him. And then the game starts all over again, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. But these aren't the coolest animals you'll face here on the Atari 2600. And that's where Frogger comes in. I want to call this one of the first action puzzle games because, yes, it's action-packed, trying to get your little frog to cross the street, but you have to plan and be quite strategic in how you do so. First of all, these cars can be quite troublesome. At very first, at least, they start off pretty easy, but as you progress through the levels, they get even harder. But then when you come to the river, well, that's where things get interesting, because sometimes the logs go under the water. Same with the turtles that you might jump on, and occasionally you could even jump on the backs of crocodiles themselves. And then when you get to the other side, you have to place your frog in the little lily pad just right. And if you fail to do so, well, you will drown, because this frog cannot swim. And after every single group of levels, things get dramatically harder, as in everything moves faster. There might even be snakes on the stage, and lots of different enemies, as everything tries to kill frogs. If you don't believe me, check out some of my other videos. Frogs basically die all the stinking time. I felt Donkey Kong was pretty darn good on the 2600 as well. Sure, Mario looks like he's dressed in jammies instead of an overall suit, and Pauline doesn't drop her purse and umbrella and whatever the heck else she leaves behind. And honestly, as Mario, I wouldn't want to pick up that crap either. There's only 2 levels here. There's the girder scene, where you continuously go up the ladders, jump over barrels, and make Donkey Kong himself run away. And then there's the massive tower, where you have to remove different rivets and continuously move up. The little fire guys here don't go up and down the ladders at all. They just sort of move left and right, making this pretty darn easy. Unfortunately, you don't have the end cutscene where you kiss Pauline and save the day. No, it just starts all over again, and it continuously does so, making it feel just not right. But it's still kind of fun for a quick pick up and play type of game. If this wasn't for your suiting, well, then check out King Kong. Yeah, this one's only 1 level, and you continuously try to go up to get to the end. There's also springs that you could jump over that will launch you up in the air, and everything seems to be alive. Sometimes dodging stuff isn't just as easy as jumping over them. Sometimes you can just move to the very side of the level, and they'll just go right past you. And also, it seems that this is a game that was made by white supremacists, because your main character sorta looks like one of those World War II symbols, and that isn't quite right. Okay, enough of 80s big monkeys. Instead, let's go to 80s quasi-superheroes with Flash Gordon. Yeah, that's right, the 1980s movie Flash Gordon got its own video game in 1983. Hey, chances are this was just a game that was made, and they just acquired the Flash Gordon license and thought they could sell some games, and they slapped that on here. It's kind of like Defender, but you have to watch both the bottom map and the top map. If these little cross things get on you, well, you're going to die pretty quick, so you have to run really fast away from them. Be careful to pick up different space astronauts that are stranded along the way, and you could even pick up these little dots, which then turn into enemies that you have to shoot. Yeah, keeping track of both these screens at the same time is one of the most difficult things you could do in a game, and it's pretty darn creative as well, and which makes Flash Gordon one of the best games. However, it seems to be missing that iconic music, so for that I turn to Vanguard. And yeah, believe it or not, there's some Flash Gordon themes here too. If you pick up the energy tank in the first level, and again later on in the game, you could even hear some of the music from the end of the Flash Gordon movie, directly ripped off from such. And this is also one of the very first Atari 2600 games that have a boss at the end of all of these levels, so it definitely gives you some accomplishment when you defeat it. And it's not going to be easy, and it luckily also has one of the very first continue systems. So when you blow up, you can continue the game and try and take down this ultimate enemy. But if these stakes are too high for you, I recommend throwing in some Smurfs. That's right, the ultimate 80s game, Smurfs. And you play as a Smurf, just trying to clear a fence. And honestly, this is as far as I could ever get in this game. Yes, I just run forward one screen, try to jump over the fence, and die. Seriously, can anyone else get over this stinking fence? Because all I do is die, and then eventually I will pull it out and decide to play a little bit of Spider-Man instead. Now, I heard a lot of people don't like this game so much. You're Spider-Man, where you have to climb up this massive tower, collect people along the way if you want to replenish your web, but I just sort of run past them most of the time because it's really not worth it. You get a little bit of web back, but the web you use to collect them isn't really enough to make it worth your while. Also, there's a timer here, which is also your web, so when it runs out, you just fall and plummet to your death. I always thought it was hilarious when Spider-Man finally hit the ground. It just made a quick thud sound. There's also the Green Goblin that you have to watch out for, because he can always cut your little string at any point in time. And it gets quite tricky. If you manage to make it to the very top of the skyscraper, well, you touch a little thing, and then you climb up another more difficult skyscraper. There's also tons of different levels of difficulty that you could set this on at any point in time, and it just makes it one of the most engaging games on the 2600. But that's not the only spider-oriented game here. Take a look at Activision's Spider Fighter. You are a spider with a 3-round burst machine gun trying to take out a mothership and all of its inhabitants. And the mothership itself is quite invulnerable until it starts letting go some of these insects. So it could be about 30 seconds before it releases them, but most of the time it releases them quite quickly. There's also fruit in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, which then they will try to steal, and when they steal all 3 of them, you're dead. As you progress through the game, you'll see oranges, strawberries, and eventually you'll come to bananas, where it will stay for hours as you try to get to the all-time top score. My brother, as a kid, actually beat this game several times because the score stopped going up. He played it so long that he completely capped out the high score, and that's quite a feat, even if it is a somewhat easier game on the 2600. I pretty much had to kill myself and got tired of playing after about a half hour or so. Eventually, I wanted to move on to much bigger adventures, and luckily, Tron's adventure did not let me down. This is a game where you just try to collect stuff up in the air. It's also one of those running, jumping games and riding elevators going up. Now, you can't take the same elevator going all the way up, so you have to continuously move from one side of the screen to the other. Now, some of these jumps can be really tricky, so I recommend just avoiding them altogether. Take the elevators or press down to fall whenever you stinking wish. There's also a little arrow that can be really tricky to grab a hold on to, but when you do, you can feel like a total badass. And this one gets really tough, because after you start clearing some levels, well, tanks will show up and shoot at you. Man, this is intense, but it doesn't get nearly as intense as Tron's Deadly Disc. This is like an arena death battle match, where people just continuously throw discs at you, and you have to dodge them and shoot out your disc. If you press the action button again, you can retract your disc, but on the way back, it cannot kill enemies. Also, you might see these things along the outside of the border, where they're warps that you could use to warp to the other side of the screen. It doesn't come in handy very often, but when it does, well, it comes in handy. You could also get hit like 6 times before you're finally dead here, so make sure you continuously kill that enemy and get some hits back. It's all about the high score, and you're never actually going to beat the game, but boy, does it ever get intense. And when you're talking about intense, well, you might as well play a little bit of Star Trek too. Now, normally, Star Trek isn't all about the action, but Sega threw that right out the window when they had their shot at this IP, because holy cow, is this ever an action shoot-'em-up adventure. You have to worry about how much fuel you have, protecting star bases from the evil Romulans, blowing them up, watching multiple different portions of the screen, trying to guide your way through freaking asteroid belts and collect tons of stuff along the way. And if you manage to make it to another warp sector, well, then you take that warp and then fight more Romulans. This is again one of those high score games, and this is also one of the games that I usually plug in my Sega Genesis controller for, because the regular Atari 2600 controller just can't do it justice. And when that Genesis controller is still plugged in, I might as well play a little bit of Moon Patrol here too. Yeah, you're on the surface of the moon, which means your jumps are a little bit more floaty. Now, things might get a little weird because you can only move so far ahead, so you don't have full control over this, but it's still really cool. And you can't just go full speed at all times either. No, you have to slow down to make some of these jumps just right. And luckily, there's checkpoints along the way. You could also shoot aliens up at the top and shoot rocks in front of you. And one of the coolest things I thought about this game is that you actually look like a bug. Instead of having wheels, it looks like you were moving your legs like they're tracks or something. And I always thought that having a car in the moon didn't make much sense. I always thought that it would have tracks or something like that instead. But if you want an even more true to arcade experience, I recommend checking out Kung Fu Masters. And this is my favorite version of the game. Sure, I have it for the NES, I have the arcade version, even the Atari 7800 version, but I continuously play this one. It's one of the few Atari 2600 games with an ending as you're trying to save your girl at the end of the 5 stages of this game. There's also a boss battle at the end of every single stage. Sure, most of the time you just run up and punching people in the dingus, but it still plays terrific, and each level only lasts about 2 minutes long, so if you get really good at it, you could probably beat the whole game in roughly 12 minutes or less. But it's not gonna be easy, and unfortunately, you'll probably die again and again trying to get to that very end of the game. But if you want a slightly easier game, and even a more educational game, I recommend Word Zapper. This is the final game I'm going to talk about here, and it's one my mom bought me to try and get me to spell just a little bit better. And sure, I still am pretty bad at spelling, and it might not have worked entirely, but I haven't seen many people talk about this game. It shows you a word, and then you have to spell out the word. There's also a time clock that you have to worry about, and when you you get to the very end, you have to hit that funny looking E character, and then you can move on to the next word. After so many words, you move on to the next level, and things start to repeat. Usually, I've typed the word flash quite a darn bit. These enemies here don't try to kill you per se, but you can set it for hard levels of difficulty where things might just kill you. Also, sometimes the letters can move super fast on higher levels of difficulty, and it's one that I always enjoy because it reminds me of the happy times that I spent with my mom growing up. Sure, there's better games for this system, and most of them I found out about much later on in my life, but these are the games that I love. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it, and I want to know what some of your favorite Atari 5200 and 7800 games are. I got myself some Corona bucks, and I can't wait to make a video on those two systems. So make sure you leave me a comment. Let me know about some Atari 2600 games you also love. And until later, I will see you again, guys.